We're gonna dive in to our topic today, which is acing interviews. But I'm gonna start by introducing myself. So, hi everyone, I'm Melinda Kohler. I'm the founder here at Roadmap. Been in tech and education for over 2 decades. I previously co-founded Almanac, valued at 120 million at Series A, and really excited to be here with all of you moving forward in our job search. That was my elevator pitch. Some of you have heard this like 100 times before, probably. If you haven't heard it, do you remember anything that I just said? Give it a minute. Feel free to call it out, drop it in the chats. And the reason I ask this is because it is hard to remember and absorb information. Okay, someone heard 2 decades. Okay. 2 decades really stood out. Okay, nice. Wow, this is amazing that is what stood out. Okay, I loved it. This is great. So something stood out. Oh, okay, 120 million, nice. Absorbing information in 30 seconds is hard. But when we get in front of someone for an interview and they're meeting us for the first time, that's how long we have to make an impression. I think scientifically they say like the first 7 seconds someone will make an impression, but they're going to listen to you introduce yourself and they're going to start to get an impression. You want to know in advance how you're going to get them excited about you. And that comes down to just squeezing in a statement that shows you're valuable. Whoops. We call that a key result. For me, it was 120 million. For us, it could be anything in our career, you know, oh, I've generated X amount of revenue, grown teams by X percent, whatever it might be. It can be a cumulative key result. It can be a single key result. And I know key results are the biggest challenge to all of this, so we'll address that today too. But you want to have that in there. You want it to be the one thing that people remember and construct your elevator pitch in that manner. Any thoughts on what happens if you introduce yourself like that in an interview? Any thoughts around what questions might come next?
Yeah, hi, this is Mira. Sometimes I struggle with the length of the introduction because I feel like when interviewers are asking you to introduce yourself or walk them through your resume, or also like talk about why you are interested in the role, that how to compact all that information in your introduction without making it too long, but still making sure that you qualify for the role.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's such a good distinction. You're right. The elevator pitch is usually before they ask you to tell you about yourself. It's like, oh, hi, I'm Linda. Yeah, really good to meet you. I've been in blah, blah, blah. I recently did this thing and I'm really excited to learn more about the role. You just try to get that in there. And then they're going to say, okay, can you tell me more about yourself, or why are you interested in this job? That question is slightly different. If they ask that question, and they will, especially in phone screens, and if it's the first interview that you've had with the company, your hiring manager, Allison, is going to ask you that question too. You want to tell them a 3-point story that is essentially 3 things from your resume directly related to 3 things on the job description. So when you do that introduction, you get a key result in and like, oh, wow, okay, really want to learn more about how you achieve that. But can, you know, just to get us started, can you tell me a little bit about why you're interested in this role? Oh, yeah, this role gives me the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z, which builds directly on my experience launching a product, acquiring that first 10,000 product user, like whatever your key results are that relate to it. It's just 1, 2, 3 job description, bullet points, and you're going to see that combination throughout. And that's how you'll treat that first question. Just boil your whole resume down to 3 points. Prioritize those points based on the 3 most important initiatives on the job description. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it helps. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll get more structured around that. What you will find is that as we talk about interview stories, the structure pretty much never changes for behavioral. We're not talking about scenarios or performance interviews today, just the behavioral, because that's typical of a hiring manager interview, and that's what Allison's got coming up. If anyone else has other types of interviews coming up, please drop in the chat. But your entire job search will come down to this elevator pitch structure and repeating it and developing it for different formats. So let's pull it back to today. We're going to talk about the job search. Then we're going to go right into this key results method for interview stories. And then we're going to practice it. So your whole job search comes down to this elevator pitch. In networking calls, you're going to introduce yourself with it. When you introduce yourself that way at the beginning of the networking call, you are much more likely to convert that call to a referral. There's still a lot of tactics and best practices you need to follow to create that. But it starts with the elevator pitch. Then you get to the phone screen. And you notice that when I said what can happen in an interview if you introduce yourself with that elevator pitch, someone can ask you specifically about that key result. That's what's most likely going to happen in a phone screen interview. We've had roadmap people walk in the room, haven't used the key results or elevator pitch method. They go to their next interview and they're just like, oh my gosh, they asked me about that one single key result the entire interview and I aced it. So you always have the power to move the interview in the direction you want to go based on what you say, right? There are specific questions that are asked in a phone screen, and there are ways to answer all of them. We'll review that another day. Today, we're going right into standard interviews, hiring manager interview, behavioral interview, and in other sessions, we can talk about performance and then the final interviews. But there are some differences for each of them. And then there are some protocols and best practices that we want to follow throughout the whole process to make sure we get that offer at the end. And we'll also, as we work together, talk about what it means to develop offer criteria and the factors that are in our control and the factors that aren't. Many of us are going to get to final rounds and we have done everything by the book and we don't get the offer. And usually that's because there was a hiring freeze, there was an internal candidate, there was a referral from the boss's cousin. And that is always, we have to remember that that's present in every job interview, and then it's a numbers game, and that's why we have a funnel. And we'll talk throughout. So this is the job search methodology that we follow. There are so many ways to approach and think about a job search process. Any thoughts, especially challenges to the process, is really helpful for all of us, like what worked, what didn't work, as you think about how you've maybe had a process like this for your own job search. And if not, we'll still have plenty of time to reflect and take questions. High level, we're running an iterative process. We're building a pipeline. Okay, so let's dive in to the interview story prep. We're taking the STAR method and essentially flipping it on its head. We're adopting the elevator pitch. So when we hear a question, we'll reflect back or give a little bit of context, immediately give that key result, and then tell the 1, 2, 3 point story. Any thoughts why it can be helpful to lead with the key result?
Captures interest.
Yep.
I would say it demonstrates executive presence as we interact with our stakeholders. They need us to be straight to the point. And when we communicate the stories of our success in this way, where we get straight to the point, I feel like it shows future success of executive presence required to keep stakeholders' attention span within reason.
Yeah, that is really good insight. so much their executive presence and the thoughts on attention span. Everything here that we just said is true, and just getting your attention. So going back to attention span and getting your attention, they're kind of one and the same. Has anyone had that experience in an interview where you're telling a story and then you just see the person kind of going, like, nodding? If we lead with a key result, we will avoid that, partly because we clarified exactly where we're going up front. If we go back to the STAR method, they often don't really understand what we're talking about until we get to the result. They don't understand why it's important to them. Even if we think we did STAR correctly, we laid out, oh, here's a situation. It's hard for them to think, well, why is this situation that you had, this nebulous environment, or anything to do with me running a sales pipeline, right? But the result that shows the business value will relate to any leader that you're talking to. Okay, we don't need to hammer in on that more. We get it. You're also directing. Yes, yes, yes. All of this. We are constantly trying to take back the power. We actually have so much more control than we ever thought. So we're treating everything like a mini elevator pitch, taking a moment to reflect back, because we don't have to be robots, right? If we were in an actual work environment and someone asked us a question, we wouldn't just give a, we would actually acknowledge the question first. So we do that. And then the result, then the story. And thereby take back the power. Even in the negative questions, this method can work for us. Do you have experience with Salesforce? If you do, and you just say yes, you just lost an opportunity. Oh yeah, I have experience with Salesforce. You did not just tell me a reason why I would hire you. So remember that anytime you hear a question, think about it in terms of this person is really saying, give me a reason why I should hire you. Do you have experience with Salesforce? No, not yet. Do you have experience with Salesforce? Yes. Versus not yet. During my years in sales, I've used Zoho and Notion. Most recently, this helped me increase conversion rate at the top of our sales funnel by 4% within 3 quarters. To start using Salesforce, I would blah, 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 right? So the key results method can be used in any type of behavioral interview question. The way we get ready to do that is we go and we look at the job description and we just write a key result for every bullet point on the job description. Often it's already on your resume. If it's not already on your resume, this process is going to help you build your very best resume. It's hard to think back to everything in our career at a specific job. We weren't all walking around quantifying the work that we did. So as you kind of work through this, feel free to go make sure your resume is as powerful as it can be. And then instead of worrying about preparing for specific types of interview questions, all you're doing is prioritizing the stories that you want to tell and using interview questions as a tool to tell those stories. Yeah, I see a question.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the value add. So what if we have a great story, but we can't necessarily quantify it? Or maybe a lot of great stories that we might not necessarily even be able to quantify. What do you find impresses you with a candidate that is still able to kind of, get their way around that without necessarily having numbers to speak on?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about that based on my experience hiring and just with the job search community. But if anyone else wants to chime in, everyone here has expertise in the job search process because we've all been doing it in their own way. So I'll give it a moment if somebody else wants to chime in. And if not, yeah. So first, I would want to hear the story, and I bet there is a way to attach a number to it. Just anything can be quantified. There are a lot of instances where maybe you don't want to quantify something. But some tips around quantifying challenges that I hear. oh, well, we never actually went live with that feature that I spent all this time on. What was the business case behind the feature? What was the intended impact? That's one way to think about it. Oh, there were 10 steps in a process and now there are 8. Well, you actually just saved 20%. So consider that too. So there probably always is a way to quantify it, but I'm not too concerned about that. If there's not a way to quantify it, just think about that key result as what was the final deliverable or outcome. Maybe it wasn't always numerical based. Were there new relationships, a new market segment? Again, they quickly start to think about how to turn those into numbers. As long as it's related to business value, a hiring manager he'll hear about it and get excited. That can mean really interesting approaches to solving problems, really interesting solutions, really interesting problems in of themselves. Do you have an example?
At this time, off the top of my head, I don't. I apologize.
That's
I
okay.
wish I did though, but thank you for asking. I'm grateful that you even asked. Thank you.
Yeah, I just like to, sometimes we ask the big questions because we want to know, but sometimes there's a specific thing and I want to make sure we get what we need from it. Allison.
Actually yesterday I went to a webinar around specifically about product interviews, and a similar question came up, and someone mentioned if you can't talk about what the impact was, you could sometimes what's helpful is to talk about what the intended income was. So like, I design and plan this and I expected it to do this, because I think generally what they're asking is like just how you think as well. And then another thing you could touch on is just like what you learned out of the experience, because then that also kind of indicates that you are someone that learns and iterates as you like and improve and have that kind of like value set. And that might actually be something that resonates with the company values. So there's some room for creativity there when you don't have the actual like impact there.
That is so true. And there are some other stages of, just to touch on that further, Allison, other stages of the interview prep, the highest priority. Well, the way I look at this is if you were about to get on a call with your dream hiring manager at your dream company and you had 10 minutes, what would you do? And then what would you do again? What would you do right up until that was it? First thing, you just make sure you have an elevator pitch. If you only have 10 minutes, make sure you have that. Then make sure you have your bullet points and some key results. Then research your hiring manager. You're trying to reconstruct their elevator pitch. And then you can get really good at thinking through, oh, these things that couldn't really be quantified, but I know this hiring manager would want to hear about them. How you get them into your stories, how you talk about them in a way that will resonate, right? Research the key metrics that you think the hiring manager cares about for their job, for their department or their team. The job description has already done the work of identifying like your top 3, but now what is this hiring manager's real pain point? We seem to have a lot of product people in the room today, but sales people think about this too. Marketing, what is the pain point? And if we know it, we can speak about how we can solve it. Yeah, Genevieve.
Yeah, hi. So can we talk about a current project or initiative that we're working on? We don't have any results yet, but we know the intended impact. We know like the goals and objectives of it. Or is that not strong enough?
Please do. Very strong. Please do. Yeah. I mean, anything that shows that you are actively right now in the process of doing your areas of expertise is always great. And that's a really good reminder, like, oh yeah, well, right now we're working on a product feature that will serve X number of users or whatever it might be. just as powerful as talking about the thing that you already concretely achieved.
Okay. And I have an example of a story that I'm very often confused if I should bring up. Like a few years ago, I've worked on a worked on a product, taken it from 0 to 1, and it kind of didn't succeed as well as we expected it to. So I'm working on, XYZ things that are going to make it really successful. But I want to talk about it because I spend so much time on these things. But then I'm also concerned if bringing up that 0 to 1 and some of the flaws that we ended up with would show it in a negative way, especially if I want to talk about. Yeah, so
Yeah, good concern, because our goal is to always say things that will get us hired. So is it okay to talk about something that did not take off? It's great to talk about. Just make sure you're not only talking about the product that didn't take off. Or if you only have, let's just say that you're like me, like I worked at like so many startups that failed eventually, but talk about the successes of the startups too, not just highlighting the fact that they failed. The other thing, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are thinking this, talk about what you would do different next time, right? Oh, the best part about this is, we did X, Y, and Z planning for this. And now when I launch products, I go and I validate with all, with the user personas, and really validate that we're selling to the right people before we use engineering time, whatever it might be. Yeah.
understood. Thank you.
Yeah, I say definitely talk about it, because your hiring managers want to feel like they know you and like you're being transparent. And even though we're emphasizing the key results and the successes the whole time, we can still talk about the failures in a positive way, and that just builds so much trust. Great questions today. Okay, so we are basically annotating the job description with our key result statements. For each statement, we're then building a 3-point story. Lots of thoughts on this 3-point story, from the STAR method: situation, task, action, results. CAR method: challenge, action, result. For me, I found that it's much easier to just think about result. How did I achieve it? 1, 2, 3. But whatever framework works for you, to be able to take something that was complex and simplify it is all that matters. You just don't want to be bringing chaos into your interview. And you'll know when you don't have a strong story, because you'll start to do things like, well, we segmented the population. Well, let me tell you first. Okay, actually, the problem with segmenting the population was blah, blah, blah. So what we eventually did, and you're not actually saying anything because you're figuring it out as you go. So make sure it's figured out. And it's a little bit tedious, but documenting it in advance is the way to do it. A lot of ChatGPT tools help with this. In fact, even talking to Conversa, another AI tool that I'm working on, will just ask you questions and then you can see your responses as you answer. So I'll share that with the group too. But organize your story in 3 points. Rule 3 works so well for humans. Our brains just eat it up. Oh, that was so simple. It's 1, 2, 3. Okay, got it. That's how they increased the user base, or reduced churn, or whatever the great key result was, right? As you do that, now you're moving into your research piece, and you can start to prioritize the stories that you want to tell based on what you learn as you research your hiring manager. So we talked about reconstructing the elevator pitch. If you're finding that, maybe their like top 3 achievements relate to something directly that you did, maybe you'll find a way to get that story. And you're only going to have a chance to tell a few stories, honestly. The interviews go quickly. We do all this prep, and then before you know it, we're like, oh, we told 3 stories. They asked follow-up questions. We started jamming, workshopping stuff, and then the interview was over, and I have no idea how I did. It's a great sign when that happens, right? But you'll prioritize according to what you learn in their elevator pitch. You're gonna, as far as building the relationship with them, you thinking through in advance what you think they care about, their 3 top initiatives or metrics for the department, is going to help you stand out and get closer to developing and falling into offer criteria. Anyone can go to an interview and wind up fulfilling all the success criteria, and then they get to the final stages and they don't get the offer, and it's like, well, so somebody else was creating offer criteria along the way, and we had to have a few candidates, right? We're all going to try to create that offer criteria, disregarding the things that aren't in our control. Sometimes we get there and we were the best candidate and we don't get the job. For these key metrics, I don't care if you actually know them. You can't possibly know unless they put them on their LinkedIn profile, but you can think through, well, what role do they play at the organization? What is their title? What does this company prioritize? Once you think it through, you have something to benchmark against throughout the interview. You can answer a question with your key results story, do your 1, 2, 3 point, and as you get closer to follow-up questions and more natural rapport, which will come when you do that. If you do 2 to 3 stories using the key results method, you're going to move into more organic rapport and relationship building. And then you'll have a chance to say something like, oh yeah, you know, I'm actually really glad you asked about my process for developing personas, because I did think, you know, kind of thinking about the company and where you guys are at, that one of the goals this year is developing a new user base, right? Something like that. And then you can let them be like, oh yeah, actually, this is how we're thinking about it. And then you can answer the question. So this stuff is gold, just thinking it through so you have a baseline. Also, at the end of the interview, this especially, well, both of these really come into play. Do you have any questions for me? Yeah, I imagine that this year the company is really focused on, you've thought through what success looks like, blah, blah, blah. But I'm very curious in your words, what the priorities are. That will help you build a relationship and will help you identify what is this person's real pain point so you can continue speaking to it. Yeah, go ahead, Ava.
Yeah, so it's funny you bring that up because I was watching a TikTok and what they were saying is that how can we be more creative with the questions that we ask at the end of the interview to make us stand out? Basically, what he was saying was that while that isn't like a bad question or anything like that of the sorts, he said oftentimes after the interview is completed, you would have gotten a feel for what that answer would be. And how can we like take that space to ask a question that, you know, might like throw them off, but like make them smile. So I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, how can we, you know, professionally spice up the questions that we ask to not only show that of course we're interested in the role, but they also aren't leaving feeling like they just asked me a question that the past 50 candidates just asked me, which is something along the lines of how do you define success in this role? So I'm wondering, are there any creative post interview questions that you've heard or experienced or just kind of made you like perk up that you felt like, you know, really showed not only the candidates' creativity as well as their interest in the company and the team that they would be working on?
I'm gonna let Allison take this one if you have any thoughts, Allison, and then I can answer it if you don't.
When I am interviewing with a hiring manager, my most well-received question so far has been like, what is it like to work with you? Or like, how are you as a leader? That kind of makes them, I think it kind of puts them into the perspective of like, oh yeah, I'm hiring you, or kind of can like visualize or put that into like perspective. And then it kind of also is like a good question for me to say like, you know, I really thrive in these environments. I'm really looking for that. I'm just making sure that's a good fit. I mean, it does depend on whatever we've discussed already. If I feel like I do have a sense for, like, I already answered this question, I don't really like double click on it.
Nice. Yes, that's a great way to build a relationship. You're actually bring it back to the relationship. Your whole goal during this interview process is to build a relationship with each person that they want to keep building that relationship. That's all it is. And anything you can do to facilitate that. I love Allison's approach to specifically just go in and say, hey, look, what about our relationship working together? And they, oh, yeah, okay, actually, let me tell you what that would look like. Another thing too that always makes me smile when I'm in the hiring seat as the person interviewing, it comes right back down to, is my screen still shared? Do you guys still see the spreadsheet? Yeah. If you ask me a question that happens to be on point with what I'm thinking about and what my pain points are, I will smile. Someone comes in and is just like, Melinda, are you really thinking about how hard it is for job seekers to find jobs in these current markets? And like that, and they like say something that I have been thinking about. I'm like, I do smile. And you get that opportunity instead of like thinking, how can I be creative? Literally just do that research. What do you think this person's top 3 initiatives are? And feed it back. And they're going to be so excited that someone asked about that day. If you ask those blanket questions like, what does success look like? That's boring. Unfortunately, every candidate has asked that. And what success look like is really in the job description. It's something you probably could already guess at. If you say, you know, I imagine that success in this role really looks like da 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 da, and then they get to benchmark and weigh in, it comes right back down to that executive presence. You're always giving when you ask. So tell them first what you think success looks like. Ask them what those 3 initiatives are, but tell them you're thinking on it. If you're going to go the route, like let's say you're talking to a recruiter or an interview that seems to really care about company culture, never put someone on the spot to like come back and like, oh, well, what was your favorite value for this company? And I will ask anyone here who has a job right now, can you name the values of the company that you work at? And most people who are interviewing you, they're like, oh, yeah, that's a great question. Let me just pop my page real quick. So don't put people on the spot to come up with brand new information. Build a relationship. Show your thinking. Morgan, have you had success with that?
It has been interesting. I have had some people who definitely were handed the resume as they walked into the room for my interview and like were just like asked these questions. So saying, is there anything on my resume or cover letter that raises concern or that I can talk more about? They're like, yeah, the whole thing. I don't know what's going on. And it's nice from my perspective to be able to see that has happened and make decisions about whether or not I want to work in a company like that. I have also gotten to have some interesting conversations about things that I wouldn't have otherwise talked about. I was an AmeriCorps member. Doesn't directly relate to a lot of the other things that I do, but if someone else was an AmeriCorps member or wanted to talk about it and they're like, hey, I saw this cool thing, you know, like it's not always a concern. Sometimes it's just, oh, let's talk more about something else. And it does, I guess I haven't had that experience of feeling like I'm in control in an interview and like owning that narrative, like you're telling us what we should be doing, and clearly I should. So
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, maybe it's
we're gonna touch on that because there's a couple things there too, like the assumption that if they haven't looked at the resume and they're just asking questions that they Googled, assume that's always happening every single time.
Yeah.
Assume the person just got out of back-to-back meetings. They just got bad news about the budget and someone on their team is sick with COVID and now they have to work late and they're coming into this interview with you and you have one opportunity to surprise them. So assume that's already going to happen and it's nothing personal that they don't know your resume. But also, and people, it depends on how you ask. Some people can pull off asking that, because I've had hundreds of people come through this room, probably thousands at this point. I steer clear of that, and I would guide anyone to steer clear of that unless you are like an expert relationship builder. When I hear, do you have any concerns about my background? Humans don't really think in negative space. I immediately think, yes, I have concerns. Let me figure them out. Oh, geez, yeah, I got a lot of concerns. And you don't want to lead someone towards the concerns. But there are other ways to ask that too. You know, you say like, hey, well, what in my experience is going to be most valuable to this role? I'm really thinking that it's the fact that I blah, 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 way in that way. But I like that you're thinking about ways to break the standard interview rapport and like get to something more organic.
Yeah. And for me, I think I've also been on the interviewer side, and everything feels like it's great in the interview and it's going well. And you've just had 3 really great interviews. And now you're going through and you're nitpicking afterwards, and you don't have that chance to defend yourself because you've left, the interviewee's not there anymore. And so they're looking for things and they're just manufacturing them. And well, she didn't work for 6 months. What's going on? What happened there? I don't know. Well, the other person had a clean work history, so let's hire them instead, So it feels for me like a way to advocate for myself.
Nice.
Without leaving. But I hear what you're saying.
I like that. Like looking for ways to advocate. Allison, and then we'll go in and do some practice.
Oh, I was just typing it in the chat, but this came up yesterday in the webinar as like a highly contentious question, because as an interviewer, it just puts them in an awkward space, like to be like, sometimes an interview could go really bad and like they feel bad being like, yeah, this interview sucked, or like you're just not a good fit for the role or something like that, right? But like, how do you actually say that to someone? And some people might be more blunt than others, or some might lie, or it just is awkward. And we're thinking about relationship building, and that could just be set up in a wrong way. So someone actually, I wrote it down, I'm going to put it in the chat. Someone recommended like some phrasing that seemed like a little more like positive, not positive, but I guess more neutral. Just like, I'm interested. Is there anything we didn't get to discuss that would be key for you to know for me to move to the next round? So that way it's like less like of a, it's kind of, I think they mentioned like, it's kind of at the end of the date and you're like, do you like me?
I would adjust that wording at the end, because you're right. You can't at the end of the date say, do you like me? But you can say, yeah, instead of I remain interested, I would actually reflect back, wow, I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about X, Y, and Z for the role. Is there anything else that you want to know from my background related to performing in this role, being successful? Anytime we get to, and it's so hard to remember that we're all operating this weird smoke and mirrors thing, and how do we tiptoe around it? We don't want to tiptoe around it, but like, you wouldn't actually go to your manager today and say like, well, hey, like, what do you like about my background that, makes you want to keep working with me right now? And they're just like, huh? Oh, well, let's just do the work. What are we talking about? And just remember that, literally think about, would you say this to a colleague? Is one way to consider that. But I love that framework, just that minor adjustment. Okay. So many tactics that we can talk through to build a relationship throughout the interview. And again, I think like the biggest learning that I'm getting from everyone today is like, I don't know, Morgan, the way that you framed that, I'm like, actually, you probably are the person who can go and ask that, because the way you ask it does not put me on edge. And like, we're all going to read the room and reflect back the energy and build the relationship in our own way. And it's just figuring out what our strengths is in the job search process and the interview process, and then iterating on them. The one tool that we do have is those key results. No one can argue with our key results. They are unique. They stand out. So we're going to do a little bit of practice. You don't actually have to know your key results, but we can think through how we might go about answering the question with a key result. And of course, if you do happen to have your resume in front of you, or a job description that that is important to you, think about it in terms of defending against that bullet point job description and in terms of answering it with your key result first. So we have a set of interview questions that are taken from real hiring managers across a lot of different roles in tech. Let's just go ahead and Morgan, call out a random number without even looking, and we'll just take the first question.
4.
Number 4. This would be a dream question to get. Tell me about an initiative you ran from beginning to end. Yeah, go ahead.
You're asking me.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Well, in my previous position as an administrative assistant with a local school district, we had to totally restart the summer camp program for about 160 students post COVID. So
that's a fantastic way to kick it off, by the way. And I'm not, for today, it's just like, let's think through how we would just like start it. I got some context and I got a number, and also I got really impressed because I can't imagine how hard it would be to restart something after COVID. And now, you know, none of us today came in with 1, 2, 3 point stories created. It's just like, can we get to the point where we're thinking about a question in terms of a key result? Yeah, that was such a great example, and also well done for just stepping up and being on the spot. Yeah, so we're gonna just kind of do this, and if you want to participate, put your hand up, or if I call on you and you don't, just say, hey, next time. But it's okay to participate by simply thinking through what you might say or what the structure would sound like. I know it's really, we're not like key results robots. It's going to take all of us some time. Allison, you want to give a number?
9.
Okay. Can you tell me about a time when you changed your approach based on pressure or feedback?
Sure. I'd love to tell you about a time where I had to revamp the testing operations organization by productizing their tool set and reinventing their processes, ultimately leading to a 25% decrease in testing turnaround time. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, take a bow. Everyone else in the room is probably gonna be really intimidated that you both just like came in with like such powerful statements. And if you are in the room and you are feeling intimidated, you're like, how did they just do that? I'm intimidated too. It's so hard being in the hot seat. But that's exactly what it sounds like. You're answering the question in terms of business value. And now, honestly, Allison, whatever you told me about your process to revamp that system, I already know that it's the right answer because it worked.
Cool.
That's another cool thing about the key results. You can, even if you are telling the story like Anna talked about earlier, if you're telling the story of a product that ultimately failed, talk about what the big learning was, and then it's like, you still can't argue with like, oh wow, that was amazing, they learned X about their product, right? You're still sharing a win, and no one can argue with that win because you started with the win first. Number 9, trying to engage how you would respond to feedback, or how you stood your ground and didn't get pressured to change directions. Oh, that's such a good question, Megan. I have so many.
I think the way that I interpreted it could be either. It just depends on what impact you had and what the result was. And then like maybe part of the storytelling is like what it was.
So yeah, we all want to demonstrate that we want feedback. And so anytime that you hear the word feedback in the question, talk about it in a positive light and how you use feedback as a tool and you seek feedback. We're going to have situations in our career where we have a lot of conviction and the feedback is wrong and we don't change. But even if the question leans towards like the negative, like, oh, pressured to change direction and you knew it was right, don't go the negative route. Like, oh yeah, I really knew that, that director was just totally wrong. And so here's what I did. Even if that was the case, reframe it. There was a director that really wanted to go in this direction, but what I learned from their feedback, on doing research into why they thought that was X, Y, and Z. And in the end, we actually followed through with my approach, but we had stronger conviction behind that approach, right? The feedback still did something. Okay. Ava, do you want to take one or do you hand up for another reason?
Yeah, throw it at me.
Okay, name a number between 1 and 26.
22.
22. Okay. Whew. What does failure mean to you?
All right. Yes. Well, thank you so much for the question. Honestly, Melinda, I don't believe in the word failure. However, as it relates to your question, what I do believe is lessons of which I can take and apply so I can make smarter decisions in the future. A situation where I considered to be a learning opportunity for me to take in the future and improve upon was when I was working with a team of architects, and I honestly didn't realize that my engineers and developers didn't understand the context of the solution we were designing for our customer. Our client was a large enterprise, and some of their non-functional requirements were high availability and agility. And as a leader of this team, I didn't really do a great job in explaining to them how important what the client requirements were and how it relates to the role that my engineers and developers played in. And as a result, there was some ambiguity in between that. And of course, we know any ambiguity with our clients and their requirements leads to failure. So looking back on that, I've learned to not only keep an open channel of communication, but do an even better job of reiterating the importance of reflecting on our clients' requirements and working backwards from that to solve their solutions, meet their needs, and hit the goals that they see for their business continuity. Thank you for the question.
Ava, your introduction was just, taking failure and then, explaining your thought process around it is just fantastic. I am so curious. What do you mean that it did something actually fail because there was ambiguity and things weren't clear? Like, what wound up happening on that project with the architects?
Yeah, so what happens in digital transformation and just the initiative to drive that is a lot of times, and I'll just throw like a statistic out. It's funny you even
Well, no,
asked me.
I meant actually that actual situation where there was ambiguity. Did a project wind up failing?
So the project itself didn't wind up failing because I caught the disconnect and was able to solve it, and we were able to deliver the solution. However, because I value leadership, I
Got
see.
it. What was that final deliverable? What did it look like?
So the client was able to receive a multi-cloud solution that served their flexibility needs and high availability, because previously they were on a single cloud, which was considered a single point of failure because
Got it. Do you know what value that account was to the company?
Yeah, so our solution highly valued the company and added that extra cutting edge to their organization because they were able to leverage the best of breed cloud services.
Do you know how valuable that specific client was to the company? Like a dollar value, like how much they were spending, like why they were so much of business importance?
I apologize. I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Got it. So these are the questions that your hiring manager is going to care about. I care about the fact that you delivered a multi-cloud solution. And so you can give yourself extra strength by saying at the very beginning, you know, oh yeah, I don't really believe in failure. It's always a learning opportunity. And in fact, on a project where we delivered a multi-cloud solution within X amount of time to a key client valuing blah, 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 there was a big risk during the project due to some miscommunications. And this is how I handled it. But like, I got so engaged in like, well, what was this story? And did something actually fail? And it turns out that no, you like saved the day and delivered that. That's so cool. Okay, I love it. And I love your presentation. Just so, okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for this feedback. I really, really pour in a lot of detail in like my interview preparation.
Yeah.
And more importantly, me shining as a leader through my responses, because I think that's the most important thing that we could all do in the tech industry, ultimately being the leaders of the new world, and all the new innovation and development. So I really
Yes.
appreciate the feedback. It means a lot. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's see. Anyone else? Or we'll come back to Allison, who has an interview coming up if nobody else is ready to. Allison, name a number.
3.
Number
Also, more kudos to Ava. You are an amazing
I know.
presenter. We're gonna kill it.
I know. I wish I had that executive presence myself. Ava, we're all gonna keep that spirit with us.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Okay,
you
tell me
keep
about
it.
a
Okay,
time.
tell me about a time you spoke up and challenged traditional thinking or process at your company.
Ooh. Sure, yeah. I'd love to tell you about a time that I helped roll out a new pricing model for our new pricing model for our subscription packages at Feedback Loop. This ultimately led to oh crap, I forgot the metrics already, but it led to something huge, like a 20-point increase in sales between Q1 and Q2 of 2022. And we were able to do that by talking to stakeholders, talking to customers.
I would, okay,
Yeah.
I just have to say, if you like named that key result, I would not even hear the 3-point story. I would just dig right into that and ask a follow-up question. Be like, well, wait a minute. What was this new pricing model? I would pull the story out of you because I would be so engaged. I'm like, you did what? New pricing strategy that increased revenue by that much that quickly? Fantastic. That's a great way to answer that. Okay, I'm gonna grab another one that maybe isn't as metrics driven and
Okay.
maybe more challenging to think about in terms of answering with a metric. How do you stay aware of new technologies or developments related to your field?
Great question. I actually would love to share a couple of like thought leadership pieces that I read. I try to listen to like 3 podcast episodes a week regarding like product things. So some of my favorite podcasts are like This is Product Management. Lenny's newsletter, or like Lenny's podcast, I think is what it's called, has been particularly interesting to me since his work is focused on product growth and just growth in general. So I'm happy to recommend some episodes if you're interested in learning about that.
Nice. If you were to like, if we were in this like, if we were playing a game and it was like, it's the key results challenge, answer every the key results. And actually, I will say though, hearing you reflect back like industry standard, like, oh, of course, okay, good. She's listening to like, she's on the Lenny's newsletter. She's doing that. She's doing that. Cool. Also, I'm impressed that anyone listens to 3 podcasts a week. I want to know how you do that. But I am curious if you get these conversational questions, and probably in a real interview, maybe don't answer everything with the key result. We're not going to be key result robots. So, and that's not the goal.
Okay.
But if you were going to include like another reason for you to hire me, how might you frame a little bit of verbiage around that?
maybe like, yes, I just tried to stay in touch with, wait, which number question was this
So
again?
we were I just asked, how do you stay aware of new technologies or developments related to your field?
Got it. Okay. So yes, I try to keep in touch with just content in the space by listening to podcasts or following newsletters of like just thought leaders in the space. Um, I also just really enjoy learning from other product managers. I think I like with my peers or, my hiring manager. I think product is different at every organization, and every product manager has like a very unique path and kind of expertise. So I just love talking to other product managers and learning about how they're approaching solving interesting problems.
I like that too, bringing in the relationships around you. If you can drop an insight that you picked up from the podcast or a conversation with a product manager or something that you learned that was key at work, and this is not something you could do on the fly, this is something you have to be prepared for in advance, right?
Mhm.
But that would be one way to do it.
So something like, like I like this morning, I listened to a podcast about jobs to be done and their importance and like building customer centric products or blah, 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 kind of like nerd out about it a little bit.
like actually like the valuable, oh my gosh, yeah, I listen to these 3 podcasts and I listen because something valuable always comes up. In fact, learned this thing that I'm going to apply this week at work or next time I launch a product.
Okay.
Like translate it into like, and this is why you should hire me, because I have this insight and now I'm going to apply it at your company so that we can, blah, blah, blah. You're always, you always want to be in the position where everything you're saying is a reason to get you hired.
Yeah.
That said, you're going to start jamming, you're going to go organic, and then it's your job to read the room and build the relationship. But you always could come back to that, like, oh, let me tell you a reason to get me hired. Allison, you're going to absolutely kill it. Yeah, I love it.
I hope so. I don't know. I'm just going.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know how to interview.
Okay.
And you have the background. I've had enough conversations with you and seen your resume. I do want to see it again. But do you have any other questions while you have all of us here? And we're all like still here, and it's been a whole hour, like, so everything you're saying is very helpful.
I think honestly, sometimes it's just like the jitters, like the question, like that like after ask, like right this last question, I was just like, wait, what's the question again? So sometimes it's helpful now because it's on the screen, but when I'm in the interview, like sometimes I'll like jump too far into an answer and then like maybe like you kind of like steered me back. Like maybe sometimes the interviewer tries to do that with me and I'm just like, I'm sorry, what was the question again? So sometimes that happens to me. So I don't know if there are any like yeah.
There are, of course, but it happens to all of us. And I want Kevin, any thoughts on that? You had some interviews recently, and I know it's past time, so if you can't respond, that's okay too.
What was the question again?
Just like you find yourself going down a rabbit hole in the interview, or just the general managing the jitters.
How to alleviate those jitters during the interview or prior to the interview? Because that's 2 complete different things, or not complete different, but
I like, okay,
Yeah,
we've seen some
right.
really good stuff in the chat, like did that answer, it's okay to ask the interviewer to repeat the question. Ava, of course, killing with the executive presence, did that answer your question? As soon as you start feeling yourself going down the rabbit hole, you can just pause and use Ava's tactic. Did that answer your question? We're going to channel our inner Ava.
Yeah. I know. Maybe
But
call Ava before all your interviews.
some pep talk.
Oh, you guys are great. Love you guys.
I think one thing I forget where I learned this from. It's probably an accumulation of things I've seen on TikTok, but like right before, the interviewer kind of concludes their portion of asking their questions, and they're like, oh, now's like the time, do you have any questions for us or me, yada yada. You can take this as an opportunity to frame it as like, hey, before we jump into my questions, is there anything that I've shared so far you would like me to elaborate more on? Just so it further reinforces like things that you've spoken to, or maybe there's something that you didn't, dive deep enough into, or maybe you went down a whole rabbit hole, but they're like, hey, actually, I want to, dive a little deeper or like take a different angle. So that could be a way of, I don't know if it necessarily helps get around the jitters, but maybe like post interview, you won't be like, oh, I wish I would have, said this or that, just so at least you presented the opportunity to the other side to, hey, like, here's a chance for me to elaborate on anything we've discussed. If not, then, we'd love to jump into questions.
It helps me manage the jitters.
Love that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Allison.
No, I said love that. Thank you.
Yeah, because I see it as, Kevin, it's sort of like you just gave us another tool in addition to Ava's verbiage. Like, did that answer your question? You kind of gave us another tool, like, oh, is there anything you can just pause when you're going down the rabbit hole? Is like, is there anything else you want me to elaborate on? That's like, just knowing that we have these tools, like, what am I going to do when I wind up deer in the headlights? Because I am. We all will. We're all going to get to that point in the interview where we're deer in the headlights and we're like, what was I even saying? Or what did she even ask? And then it's just like, oh, is there anything else I should elaborate on? Or, hey, did I answer your question? I feel better having those in my toolkit.
Yeah, my closing thought on this is, we're all human. I mean, if you're 100% perfect, then you're either AI or a robot, but we're not. So just recognizing there's a human in us. And like, I'm sure the interviewers, if they're in the hot seat, they could, go through similar experiences as well.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Amazing. You guys, amazing questions, amazing support. Allison, we're so excited that you got this interview and glad that we all got to spend some time together. We have more sessions coming up, and we're also launching a job search mastery cohort. Come join us. I'll send you all an email. I know we're way past time, and I'll see you all at the next one.
Thank you.